So on Monday, 30 House progressives released a letter asking President Biden to push harder for direct negotiations with Russia over the war in Ukraine. An anonymous House aide told the Hill's Hanna Trudo that the letter was circulated for signatures in June. However, the source wasn't sure why it was released publicly now, noting that the law makers, quote, didn't consider election timing.
Yesterday, the Congressional Progressive Caucus retracted their initial statement. Former Congressman from Michigan and first Libertarian Party member of Congress, Justin Amash, tweeted in response, quote, "No Democratic constituency has been more sidelined under Biden than genuine progressives. Democrats are in control, yet progressives consistently have to settle for gestures and occasional scraps. When they step out of line, the establishment quickly reminds them who's in charge." Joining us now to discuss is senior political correspondent at The Hill, Hanna Trudo. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
So, what topsy-turvy world are we in where we have kind of libertarians and a sliver, but a meaningful sliver of the right aligned with non-elected progressive protesters and LaRoucheites in the streets to form this really anemic anti-war movement wherein progressives are bending the knee at the slightest bit of pushback over what was a really benign letter advocating for some abstract diplomacy. What's going on here?
Yeah, so that's a good way of summing it up. I mean, I talked to one person familiar with the drafting of this letter yesterday early in the morning, and they basically told me, look, this was drafted by a group of, I think, at the time, a couple dozen House progressives back over June or July, over the summer months when things looked pretty different on the ground in terms of at least the public perception and the actual events. Back when the Biden administration was trying to figure out what was going on. And pretty candidly, this person involved with the process told me that the Progressive Caucus was in fact waiting until they got to 30 signatures among their nearly 100-member caucus in order to release it. And so, didn't quote the quote that I think we put in the piece was something to the effect of, we didn't consider the timing of the midterms when folks were drafting that over the summer. So, in hindsight, I think that that's probably plausible. Now, if you think back to the way that things were over the summer, there was a lot going on. It was a really tumultuous time. The drafting of that letter, to your point, in a lot of progressives' mind was sort of benign, given the unpredictable circumstances on the ground. But now it's a really tough position that they're in because, like you alluded to, there are some, really prominent progressives in the House and also, Sanders in the Senate came out yesterday totally kind of disavowing this letter. And that puts them in a really tricky position because while some may not even privately disavow the contents of it and what they were trying to achieve, they do have to publicly kind of walk it back. And that's what we've seen.
Right, which is a massive setback for the actual the sentiment of non-intervention among progressives that I guess isn't shared now with their Democratic representatives. Do you have any insight into what actually happened in terms of the letter being released? Because so maybe this staffer went rogue and released it because they actually agree with the position in the letter and, wanted to put people on the record. Maybe it was done with permission and then the blowback from more establishment Democrats was so vicious that they decided to kind of, blame this staffer and say we didn't intend to release it. Do you have any more knowledge of how this actually happened? Or maybe, I guess it was just somebody hit send on a document before they meant to, which does happen. Kind of hilarious if that's what went wrong here. Do you have any more information about that?
Yeah, so we're still working through some of the reporting on that today. And one thing that I was told yesterday from a senior Democratic Hill source who's very knowledgeable about sort of the process side of these things was basically just a total and complete shock that this would have happened. It was this person's understanding, again, with knowledge of the situation, that it was a lower level staffer, at least involved in it, which tracks with what Jayapal wrote, publicly. She didn't quite say lower level, but she did kind of blame it on the staff, which is, in politics in DC, Not such a great look, obviously, but that seems to be at least one element of it. Although there are, I think that there's probably more to the story that we're going to be reporting out in the next couple of, at least the next day or two, because there are kind of conflicting reports saying that Jayapal personally, signed off on the release. And, like I mentioned, somebody involved in the drafting of it yesterday told me point blank that they were waiting to get to 30 signatures. So the fact that they were waiting, kind of contradicts the earlier narrative that it was just drafted over the summer and it's old and, the language is outdated. The language was outdated. I think that was clear to everybody, that at least everybody that I talked to. But the fact that it was released, I think, is something between staff and Jayapal, as unsatisfying of an answer as that might be. I think that is probably the case. And again, the senior Hill person.
In what way was the language outdated?
They said that it wasn't reflective of the developments, the more recent developments, or even kind of considering the administration's newer push and sort of involvement now in fall versus the summer.
Yeah.
But again, that sort of it speaks to the broader issue of like, how could this happen? That senior staffer that I talked to in the Hill was basically saying this is completely a junior level, like a junior league type of move, and it was really shocked that it would happen at the CPC, just because it's so close to the election time and it's so close to Democrats trying to kind of unite over one solid message that this gives Republicans more fodder in their minds.
Well, Ukraine isn't the only area where progressives and establishment Democrats just can't seem to reach an agreement. Hannah, you reported that the left wants Democrats to focus more heavily on the economy before midterms, as opposed to abortion access, or in addition to, rather, abortion access or Donald Trump's future in the Democratic Party. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's another major divide. We've been reporting that on the past couple of weeks. So Democrats, progressives in particular, have been pushing for months, for most of Biden's administration, but at least the last 6 months or so, for a stronger and more cogent sort of economic populist pitch with the midterms in mind. And mainstream Democrats, moderates, activists in sort of the reproductive rights sector, or various interest groups, have pushed back and have said, that's, the economy is important, but it's not as important as, let's say, the Roe decision, which was huge over the summer again. Now we're seeing that shift because mainstream Democrats have kind of come around to the view that progressives have been pushing all along, that tracks with public polling now, saying, look, the economy is overwhelmingly on the top of minds of voters, as it is almost every election cycle. There's kind of a reason that phrase exists. There was a recent poll, I think, from Siena College and the New York Times that ranked the economy as something like 26% and inflation, I think, 18%. And abortion down to 5%. And that is a massive red flashing sign to Democrats who are saying, oh my God, we need to figure out what the closing pitch will be. And I think that what we're seeing is a divide among the advocates and the more traditional Democrats who thought that abortion was going to be their silver bullet in the final stretch of the midterms. And it's just not, at least as the polling indicates right now, it's not shaping out to be that way quite yet. Not to say, they're not important issues. But the fact that, more traditional or moderate Democrats are trying to link abortion as an economic issue, again, that's not that that's wrong. It's just that it's not resonating that way with voters. And so there's a scramble to kind of, make the argument separate at this point.
Well, thank you so much for those insights, Hannah. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.